Welcome everybody to this first enlightening lunch of the new semester, the new year, the new administration, perhaps the new millennium, not really, but it kind of feels that way. It's been a while since we've been able to be together at an enlightening lunch and actually share our lunch. And for that, I continue to be sorry. I'm imagining at some point in the future, we may be able to do that, maybe even in some ways creatively later this semester. Um, as most of you know, I'm Dave Gustin. I'm the director of the School for the Future of Innovation Society. And this year, the Enlightening Lunch series has been themed around issues related to transitions to justice. And in the fall semester, as those of you who participated know, we hosted various speakers from within the ASU community. And this semester, we've invited some speakers from outside the ASU community who are colleagues, friends, people that we know who are working, fighting the good fight, as it were, around issues related to transitions to justice in our communities that we wanted to bring in closer to us to learn from them and to interact with them. Today, it is a great pleasure to introduce Sylvester Johnson. From Virginia Tech. I think I met Sylvester about 5 or 6 years ago. Was it like right before your move to Tech, Sylvester, when you were giving a talk at Gary Marchant's conference on governing emerging technologies, I believe, downtown at the law school. Sylvester and I have had the opportunity to get to know each other a little bit more through the New America and Ford Foundation's Public Interest Technology University Network. At Virginia Tech, Sylvester is the Assistant Vice Provost for Humanities and Executive Director of the Tech for Humanity Initiative. And that's what I'm going to be, that's what I've asked him to talk a little bit about today. I'll leave any further introductions that Sylvester might want to have to him. And the way that this operation works generally is that he will have the floor for about 25 or 30 minutes to speak to you about the Tech for Humanity initiative and anything else that he manages to slip in there. Then we'll have another 25 or 30 minutes to the top of the hour that for questions and answers in a more formal setting. And that's when the recording will stop. That's when we'll ask folks who are not among the doctoral students to say farewell, and then we'll have the opportunity for another 30 minutes or so, assuming Sylvester has that time, to get in a little deeper dive with our doctoral students. So with that as a brief introduction, I will turn the Zoom over to Sylvester. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks very much. So I am very excited to be invited to talk with you during the lunch, and will certainly always appreciate the opportunity to have connected with a few folks I met at Arizona State some years ago. That was the SNET conference that was being hosted there. Dave, you and I first got to meet in person, and I really enjoyed being able to work with you through the Public Interest Technology University Network as well. So really excited to hear about the wonderful work that's happening at Arizona State. One of my dear friends and colleagues, Sally Morton, has just joined the team there at ASU. So really paid attention to some of the emerging initiatives that I think are going to be very fruitful. Today, I want to spend a few minutes talking with you about the Tech for Humanity initiative at Virginia Tech and some of the imperatives for this, given the emerging challenges and opportunities that we're seeing with the growth of technology innovation. I want to spend a few minutes framing some of those challenges with the exemplary cases of things that we see happening that are important causes for us to be deeply deliberate and concerned about achieving equity and approaching the guidance of technology with a very keen commitment to social justice, to creating opportunities and structures and systems that will achieve the kind of small d democratic, equitable outcomes that are going to be essential for us to have a world that we actually want to live in. And our higher ed institutions are going to be very critical for that because of the role that we play in shaping the future of talent and preparing stakeholders who are going to play many different kinds of roles in helping to determine the nature of our society. So I'm excited to be invited to talk with you today. I'm going to share my screen to share the slide deck that I have prepared to talk through. And I hope you're seeing that large full screen presentation view. So if you aren't, just let me know in the chat or speak to me. Otherwise, as we tested this before, I think you're seeing that. So I want to spend a few minutes, as I said, pointing to some examples of why we created what we call the Tech for Humanity initiative at Virginia Tech. That is very much focused on social justice, humanities. And when we say humanities, we don't mean just 4 or 5 disciplines. We really mean humanistic, human-centered approaches to work and the future of talent. The Tech for Humanity initiative has several dimensions to it. It is broadly connected to and supportive of the many different ways that our talented people at Virginia Tech are engaged with technology as a comprehensive enterprise that requires lots of disciplinary approaches, lots of connections as well across those across those disciplines, as well as expertise within them. And there are many different examples of how we're trying to achieve a comprehensive approach to make technology accountable to human interests. When we say human interest, we're not excluding the environment. We don't mean anthropocentrism by that. What we try to mean in communicating in that way is really having an ethical approach that understands that there has to be something greater than technology for its own sake or innovation for its own sake. There has to be some guiding efforts and aims and outcomes. And those outcomes really have to center on the kind of world that we're creating. Is it fair? Is it equitable? And so I'll go through some specific examples of why this work is important, and then I'll give some examples of what we're doing with the initiative. This is Sophia. Some of you are probably familiar with. This is an AI humanoid robot manufactured by the Hanson Robotics Corporation. Sophia is capable of engaging in her own conversations using machine learning, deep neural network algorithm, and can be extemporaneous as well as give pre-recorded speech. She appears here on the Resilient issue of the cover of Elle magazine with a caption that reads, "What does fashion tell us about the future?" And this robot has been very significant because of what Sophia represents. This is a likeness of a human, really focused on human-computer interaction. Again, that happens particularly through conversation and facial gestures, expressions. Sophia actually gave a keynote talk a few years ago in 2017, to be exact, in Saudi Arabia at what was called the Future of Investment Summit. And she was particularly noted for the fact that it was announced that she was granted citizenship. She was the first machine to become a national citizen in world history. My guess is that she's not going to be the last one. This was something of a publicity effort by Saudi Arabia, but there was also something more than just a stunt appeal here. Saudi Arabia is very serious, for example, about transitioning their economic dependence away from petroleum and moving into technology. You don't have to dig technology out of the ground. You don't need a massive delivery system of pipes or other infrastructure to transport it across thousands of miles. Technology really is something that can be achieved through capital. So you need cash, you need human talent. And if you can put those things together, you can create a massive driving force to produce economic growth. So this is really what Saudi Arabia was pointing to. And they believe rightly that digital technology is actually going to provide a way for them to move away from petroleum dependence, to diversify their economy, and to participate more vigorously in the global prosperity that we're seeing happening through technology innovation. Just to give you some sense of that, for example, the World Economic Forum in 2016 and 2017 did some anticipatory studies of what they were expecting to see with the growth of innovation through digital technology, and anticipated that over the following decades, so that takes us to about 2027, for example, that digital technology, so that includes AI, but not limited to AI, that digital technology would add roughly $100 trillion to the economy. That's 100 trillion. Now, at the time, the global economy was around global GDP was around 80, 85 trillion dollars, give or take a few trillion. In other words, what they were saying is that within a decade, it would be reasonable to expect that digital technology could actually more than double the total value globally of all new goods and services. That's considerable. That's that's in a decade, you add more value to the global economy than already exists in the entire world. All right. Even if they're off by a few trillion, by 20 trillion, by 30, if they're off by 50%, it doesn't change the basic point. And the basic point is that we have never seen or encountered the kind of wealth creation that digital technology is bringing. This is truly unprecedented. And it is certainly a cause to appreciate both the capacity for prosperity that can be created, but also the income disparity and wealth inequality that can be vastly accelerated beyond anything we have experienced thus far. So Saudi Arabia was doing something that was very smart. It's indicative of these larger global efforts. And the technology that Sophia represents is as well indicative of many important questions about the future of wealth and the future of work. If that much wealth is going to be created in the world, where will it happen? Who will get to participate in it? Is there a way for us to try to create shared prosperity? So that's a very important question. That the technology is not just about algorithms. It's about economic security. It's about wealth creation. It's about economic inequality. And so I'll be saying more about that. Here is an image of a debate that happened, as the hashtag shows there, in 2019. So about 2 years ago, in February of 2019, the IBM Corporation had its Project Debater. That's what they're calling it. This is an algorithm AI software system that is capable of engaging humans in conversation, of listening to their arguments, of generating its own response to those arguments in real time, having ingested, so having read massive amounts of information, the equivalent, for example, of hundreds of thousands and millions of pages of information about a given topic. It can listen to the arguments, it can pick out what the person's saying, it can give its own information-rich, analytically astute response to what they're saying in order to argue for a certain point. And it was placed in a debate on a show called Intelligence Squared, which is produced in the UK. The person you see on the left there, John Donovan, is the host of Intelligence Squared. The person in the center, Harish Natarajan, is a world-renowned, award-winning debater who was actually pitted against this machine. And I'll just quickly tell you, the Harish Natarajan technically won this debate. He changed more people's minds than the AI system did. But the audience they indicated that they learned a lot more about the topic by listening to Project Debater. And the question that they were debating is, should preschool be subsidized? That was the question. Should preschool be subsidized? Think about that. That's not some simplistic question, it actually causes for very subtle analysis. And if you ever have an extra 15, 20 minutes on your hand, Google Project Debater, Intelligence Squared. You can actually see this debate. It's posted on IBM's research page, and you'll get a sense of what I'm talking about. One of the questions that this raises is the role that AI might ultimately play in the kinds of decision processes that are currently being handled largely by humans. If a machine can understand that much about a topic, can make sense of it, and it can make an argument for a certain point, could this be part of the future of how we process legislation? When in reality, we have lots of human legislators, for example, voting on bills that they've never read because they just don't have time to read it, whereas a machine could do it very quickly. This is an example of AI, and it's an example of how the machine learning is actually moving into areas that a lot of people might have thought would be impossible, employing what's called fuzzy logic. This is an image of Micah Johnson and a robotic robot manufactured by the Northrop Grumman Corporation. Micah Johnson was killed by this robot in the summer of 2016. He became the first citizen of the US to be killed on US soil by a robot. Now, drones have killed US citizens on Moraliki, for example, in other countries outside of US borders. This was the first one in US soil. He was a suspect in the shooting deaths of multiple police officers. And the Dallas Police Department, where this occurred, they had this robot as part of their arsenal because there is a very long and elaborate pipeline of military weapons that goes to law enforcement offices, police departments. This is the case in the US, is the case globally. We can talk about the history of that if you wish, but it started in the 1960s with the militarization of police departments under the guidance of the FBI in order to target social justice activists, particularly Black activists who were fighting against racism. It is no accident that he was a Black person who was the first to be killed by a robot. That is a reflection of the kinds of practices that are shaping policing in the US. So he was a suspect in their shooting deaths of several police officers. He was in a building and would not come out. So the robot was fixed with a pound of C4 explosive. It was sent into the building in close proximity to him. And when it got close enough, the C4 was detonated. And the shock wave killed him instantly. It didn't, the police department pointed out it didn't harm the robot, but it killed him instantly. This became a point of controversy because he had no due process. And he was never detained or arrested. He was never tried. He was just killed. So when this happened, police departments throughout the country indicated, oh yeah, we've got the same kind of equipment. In a similar situation, we would do the same thing. This robot was manufactured by Northrop Grumman for warfare in Afghanistan, but as I said, it's part of domestic policing. And one could say, well, the robot didn't actually make a decision to kill him. Human had a trigger button, and they activated the robot at the right time. And that would be a good point. So here's another example of AI being designed for weaponization purposes. This is an illustration of something called the JAG M4 missile, the Joint Air to Ground Missile. And it's called joint because it can be used by the various divisions of the armed forces in the US, the Navy, Army, Marines, and Air Force. Its adaptability, it is distinguished by its use of machine learning software that allows the missile to actually interpret visual data and location data to understand where it is, where it's going, how to evade enemy fire, and how to most optimally inflict damage or kill factor destruction when it's striking a target. So for example, this missile can be armed on a fighter jet that's on a US carrier deployed somewhere in the world. A human gets in the fighter jet, they take off, they have this missile that's armed for deployment. they can be 30, 40 miles from a target. They can lock onto that target. And as Northrop Grumman says, and excuse me, this is not Northrop Grumman. This is actually Lockheed Martin actually has manufactures this missile. Lockheed Martin likes to say that the pilot can fire it and forget it. They call it fire and forget technology, meaning that once the pilot locks onto the target and fires a missile, the pilot can just go back to the carrier ship. The missile does the rest. It's able to navigate to the target. If it comes under attack, enemy fire, it knows how to evade detection and evade being countered with counter fire. It can figure out that if its target is a tank, for example, it knows a tank is not a tree, that a tree is not a rock. It knows that that a tank is not a bus. So it has I'm going to say, an understanding, a conceptualization. You can define that differently. If you don't think machines can think, you can say it has a mathematical capacity to match up the target with what is actually in front of it or what it's supposed to lock onto. And it knows how to pursue the target if that tank, for example, tries to evade. It can also figure out the right angle of attack on its own to strike that target, as I said, to optimize the kill factor and destruction resulting from that strike. So this is an example of an AI system that is able to do some of the processing to take the burden off of the human operators. And once it's authorized to do the strike, it can actually complete that mission without further human guidance. That technology that I just described to you is almost 10 years old. That's not even the front end of the cutting edge. That was production ready back in 2014, and it was developed back in 2012. Those algorithms have been tweaked, but the point is that this is 2021, and so there are actually things that are even more sophisticated. I want to end with this example of how digital technology systems are being used to provide very important benefits. In this case, to provide healthcare solutions. So the gentleman in this picture in the foreground is Ian Burkhart. Ian Burkhart, in 2014, was involved in a diving accident. He was diving in the waters that were too shallow, and he struck the bottom at such speed that he ended up severing his spinal cord. As a result, he became paralyzed from the neck down. So he was unable to have continued mobility of his arms and his legs. This had a devastating impact on his ability to be mobile. He couldn't walk. He couldn't even move his arms or legs. In this picture, he is playing a therapeutic guitar. That's why this guitar looks a little bit different from any that you might see or have at home. Well, you might be asking, hold on, Sylvester, you just told us that Ian Burkhart was paralyzed from the neck down. How is he playing this guitar? Okay, so good question. So he has a chip implant that's embedded in his brain that is manufactured by the BlackRock Corporation. It's a multi-ray electrode that allows for an individual's neural tissue to be connected to a machine AI system. So he had asked his doctors to implant this chip in his brain so that he could regain control of his arms, as this technology allows, simply by thinking. The technology looks at the brain signaling activity. It interprets that signaling activity to understand what the person is trying to do, how they're trying to move different parts of their body. And in this case, this chip wirelessly relays a copy of that signaling to receptors that are on his arm. So you can't see the sleeve that's on his right arm. It's cut off in this picture, but that sleeve connects to his motor neurons in his arms. And whenever he thinks about moving that arm, the brain chip that's in his brain, it actually detects a signal. It mimics that signal. It relays that signal to the receptors in his arm. The receptors in his arm then relay that signal to the motor neurons that are in his arm. So they get the same signal. The motor neurons in the arms receive the same signal that they would get if that signal were traveling from his brain through the spinal cord. These wireless receptors are bypassing that spinal cord, however, and he's able to move his fingers to play this guitar. So here is an example of a brain chip implant that is relying on a machine AI system, in this case, again, machine learning system, that can restore capacity or mobility. This is an example of connecting a brain to a machine interface, a computer. And that's called, for short, brain computer interface technology, or BCI technology. And what I just described to you is a one-way open loop where the signal goes from his brain outward to, in this case, the motor neurons in his arm. The military is also developing something called closed loop BCI. This is when you have a smart prosthetic device that would be used when someone they've gotten, say, a military injury, some warfare. That's why the military is interested in this therapeutic technology. They need a prosthetic limb. It is now possible for people with prosthetic limbs to actually experience the sensation traveling through that limb. That prosthetic limb, for example, can be used to pick groceries out of a bag, and the person who's wearing the prosthetic limb can feel whether they're about to pick up a carton of eggs or an orange or an apple from out of the bag, because they are able to experience the sensation of the tactile inputs that a biological arm or hand might feel. In other words, not only are they controlling the prosthetic by having a signal travel out from their brain to the prosthetic device, but the prosthetic device can also, it's engineered for sensation. So it can feel or sense things, and it sends that signal back to the brain. So that's closed loop. And that's just one example of how combining people with machines is going to increasingly be a part of how we support positive health outcomes, in this case, restoring capacities, or as major military industrial states throughout the world are interested in enhancing people who have no injuries so that they can have superhuman capacities for warfare. So think of a soldier who is able to receive the optical inputs from the visual data feed of a drone. So instead of having to look at a monitor to see what a drone is seeing, maybe one just slips in a contact lens or has a brain chip or some non-invasive way of connecting to a machine neural network so that they can wear a device that wraps around their head and that provides transcranial stimulation in order to relay those signals. But the point is that they can see what the drone is seeing. Maybe they can control the drone by their thinking, and this can enhance warfare or other things. So all of these are just different examples of how technology innovation is creating both very important advances in our ability to address problems and to enhance our lives. And it's also creating very important challenges, such as the prospect of unprecedented massive wealth inequality, or the heightening of the capacity of police departments to do the work that they do, that might very well map onto racial inequality, class inequality, different types of political systemic situations of disparity that can undermine or threaten people's well-being. And so the issue is, as we develop and further technology, are we creating the talent that we need in order to do so in a way that gets us the equitable outcomes that we need to have if we're going to be able to govern and guide this technology and have a society that is not more unjust, but is actually more equitable than it is now. That's a world that we want to live in. And the answer to that question, I think, is resoundingly, we must pick up the mantle and take up this challenge as educational institutions. And so I want to give you a few ways that we're trying to do that with our Tech for Humanity initiative at Virginia Tech. The first way that I'll talk about is through curriculum design. We have received a grant from the Andrew Mellon Foundation that is supporting our work to create a new undergraduate minor that we call a pathways minor. It's just a terminology that we use at Virginia Tech to refers to a special kind of minor of which every credit counts toward general distribution. Okay, so this is a minor any undergraduate can take that will have all of its credit hours count fully toward what we call general ed requirements, or sometimes this is called distribution requirements. These requirements must be taken by every student who gets a diploma from the university. It doesn't matter what your major is. You can be majoring in engineering, you can major in philosophy, you can major in business, it doesn't matter. If you're going to get a diploma from the university, if you're going to get a degree, you have to fulfill your distribution requirements. Okay, so with the pathways minor, it becomes possible to have a curricular offering that is open to any student of any major. It doesn't add a single credit hour to their time to completion of their degree because they have to do gen ed anyway, anyhow, and it doesn't add a single dollar to the cost of degree completion. We're calling this Pathways Minor a Tech for Humanity Pathways Minor. It focuses on the creation and preparation of future talent for stakeholders in our society who are going to be making decisions, doing things related to technology by contributing toward their educational enrichment in five areas that we see as being important at the intersection of humanistic, human-centered approaches and the cultivation of technology talent, where technology talent is broadly conceived. Okay, so those areas are here. We're focusing on AI ethics. What are the kinds of frameworks and problem analysis that need to be cultivated in order for the talent that is going to be responsible for the design, the deployment, and the regulation of AI software to bring about some understanding of the ethical concerns and the ethical interests. Democracy is one of the most important areas of our society that is going to continue to be shaped and impacted by technology innovation in years to come. We want that to be a positive impact and not a negative or destructive impact. So it will be important for people to actually study about to study about democracy, its institutions, its systems, its challenges in ways that are important for enabling them to be much more effective in achieving some positive guidance over technology. Human enhancement. So I showed you an example of human enhancement with Ian Burkhart. Here's a human whose capacities, you might say, whether inborn or not, is actually being augmented, is being changed by combining them with some technology system, whether it's invasive or not. Okay? Combining people with machine systems. That's going to be very important. That's not just digital technology, by the way. You might recall not too long ago that a researcher in China modified the DNA of embryos in order for the children who were born to be immune to HIV. That was the aim of that research. Now, that research was in violation of China's ethical standards for genetic engineering, and a number of different countries actually weighed in and were alarmed at what was happening. The point is that synthetic biology, changing people's DNA, reprogramming their cells for any reason, is going to become increasingly important. And that's a form of human enhancement as well. What kind of considerations do people need to bring in to be able to do that work effectively? Histories and cultures of technology are also important in this undergraduate minor, as are big questions about the future of humanity. What is that going to mean? That could be the future of work. It could be how we will need to deal with an understanding of human types, given the capacity of human enhancement to begin to function politically as a way of creating a new class of highly privileged people, or a new class of people who are highly susceptible to being discriminated against or marginalized. but that futurity factor is important. So those are the 5 areas that are going to drive the creation of this new minor. We're also really excited to have funding from the Henry Luce Foundation. So they are funding 3 years of summer institutes that will invite experts in areas of religion and theology to come to Virginia Tech and to study the challenges and opportunities that are being created by technology innovation in order to develop some of the ethical approaches and concerns that are going to be important for managing these issues. One of those big areas, for example, is materialities. You can call this philosophies of things and matter. Is how do you know something's alive? If you have some hybridized entity, and that hybridized entity is a human, for example, how do you talk about their humanity and their human nature, particularly if they're combined with a machine, in ways that are hopefully more critical than the ways we have done that in the past? The history of deciding who or what counts as human has been shaped by a history of dehumanization. And so when we look at this history of theories about matter, philosophies of things that are often really integral to religious traditions or shaped by those traditions, what should we be learning if we start with a commitment to social justice? Liberation practice, so a number of different uh, national histories have been shaped, and transnational histories have been shaped by something called liberation theology that was really very much a third world movement, and third world peoples in the so-called first world focusing on liberation movements targeting racism, colonialism, sexism, etc. We are hoping that as we bring in experts from religion and theology, that they're able to draw on their expertise in the history of those traditions to help us think forward about the role of social justice in preparing new talent and shaping new research in humanities to engage with these big questions around technology. The kind of ethical frameworks, and also uh, really paying attention to some of the important work we're doing. And I want to end with these two as well. We have a Tech for Humanity lab that is focusing on human security, uh, bringing human security to bear on questions of research and technology. So how are technology systems actually affecting our, our democratic institutions? How is it affecting the ability to really conserve human rights and protect those? Very important. I can talk more in our Q&A about the kind of research that lab is doing. And finally, our Calhoun Discovery Program at Virginia Tech is a program that's being led by Thanasis Rikakis, who actually used to be at Arizona State and was able to work closely with Michael Crow. He is leading an effort that a number of different entities on campus are connected to in order to train undergraduates across 9 different program areas, including what we call Fusion Studios. This brings a humanistic, human-centered approach to preparing future talent in technology by focusing on what's called socio-technical. If we're training students to engage with societal innovation and societal challenges, and we're also training them to understand technical systems and technical challenges, what are the benefits that we get from having that comprehensive way of training people across disciplines? And if we allow them to work with students who are in other program majors, in this case, 9 different program majors across the 4 years of their undergraduate experience, how do we benefit from that? And we benefit from their being able to understand the connections between this human side and technical side. That becomes very important. So I want to stop there, and we'll be happy to engage with any questions you might have.
Great. Thank you so much, Sylvester. And sorry that you can't hear the applause that I'm sure would have been heard if you were delivering this in person. That was very nice, and I think resonant with enormous amount of work that's done here, and concerns that the students and faculty here have. I appreciate the reference to Thanasis as well, because as you know, as you mentioned, he was here at ASU a while ago, and a couple of things that he did, founding the School of Arts, Media, and Engineering, where we have, I believe, 3 shared faculty members participating in the founding of our Emerge Festival of Futures in its first iteration back in 2012. So he was a great collaborator to have here, and I like to see him prospering with you guys as well. Let's open it up for questions. There are a variety of ways that you can offer your questions through the chat. You can raise a physical hand and somebody might see you. You can raise one of your virtual hands and somebody might see you, or you can just pop in. Please, questions for Sylvester.
Well, I'll start it off. Sylvester, thank you so much. That was so very, very informative. And I feel like I actually have a million questions for you. But one of the things I'm curious about, you talked about some of the programs you have at Virginia Tech, and they were kind of more for the undergraduate level. What are some of your doctoral students doing? And do you have a program, and what types of projects are they working on?
Yeah, great question. The Tech for Humanity Lab is also involving our graduate students in the research. There are many different things that are part of the Tech for Humanity initiative. So the work that we're doing, for example, we have a grant from the Mellon Foundation to try to understand the way AI might be leveraged in order to enable digital records to be searched at the National Archives, given the massive growth of digital records. And so that's going to involve some inputs from our graduate students. And that's a planning grant. If we get further funding, will also involve the graduate students. We're part of the Public Interest Technology University Network, and we have some of the research that we're trying to focus on around technology and policy is also going to involve our graduate students. For example, the university has just created a graduate certificate in technology policy. And that is a humanistic, human-centered approach that is preparing future talent at the graduate level, that we're hoping to grow and expand the course offerings. So that's actually something that's going to be part of our query in this round of funding with the Public Interest Technology University Network. So those are a couple of ways, but we are definitely including the graduate education component as part of this, as well as the research component.
What else do we have for Sylvester? Sean.
Hey there. I also feel like many questions come to mind. That was a very interesting presentation. Thank you. I was wondering, when it comes to discussing machine versus biological life, how do you differentiate when technology, well, first, when biology becomes technology, or when technology can modify biology in ways like with CRISPR and so forth? Like, as that starts to blur and horizontal gene transfer comes, like when all these things kind of get murky, I'm wondering what's the thought around machine when transformations like that are happening?
That's a great question. So I'll say a couple of things. One, the question you just raised is exactly why, as we think about the future of talent, that we have to be comprehensive in the way that we define what a technologist is, right? Because in the past, and to some degree in the present still, that is too often has meant, well, you write code, or you build robots, or you design surgical devices or bridges or something like that. And it has not included people who are experts in political systems, or who really understand inequality, and who know a lot about histories of human violence and just genocide, and what happens with regimes and practices of dehumanization. So we have to make that part of how we're preparing future talent. And it can't be, well, we're going to sprinkle some humanistic approach on top of STEM. It calls for fundamentally reconceiving what the technology is. So technology is comprehensive. It's not just technical. And the most difficult problems for us to solve are actually, they appear to be non-technical problems. That doesn't mean that technical challenges aren't difficult. If you don't believe they're difficult, try to make your own smartphone and just see what it's like. but rather that we actually have a better track record of solving technical challenges than we do the human side of technology. How do we deal with wealth inequality that's accelerating because of digital tech? How do we deal with what you're asking about? What do we do with synthetic biology? So we need to prepare the talent and get the research and the different kinds of inputs so that we can answer your question. The second thing that I'll just quickly say is I have my own off the cuff opinion about that, but I don't have so much hubris that I think I alone have the answer to that question. That we're going to need lots of collaborative efforts. But I will say what we're hoping to do with the Summer Institutes is to get more people involved in trying to understand these questions who have a lot of familiarity with the global purview of philosophical traditions around who and what does it mean to be alive, who and what gets accounted as human. I was a chemistry major in undergrad. One of the things I learned is, well, we had something called organic chemistry. And organic chemistry basically is the chemistry of hydrocarbons. So when you have carbon and hydrogen together, it's called an organic compound. But at the bottom of it is all made of the inorganic. You just put the inorganic stuff together and you come up with organic things. And I think it's fair to say that we need something more sophisticated than the hard boundaries that would say, well, the stuff that's over here is alive and the stuff that's over there is not. Or the stuff that's human is over here and the stuff that's not human is over there, especially when we consider most of our cells are bacterial cells, so meaning non-human cells. So we definitely, that's my little off the cuff. We need more complexity, but of course we need a lot of good talent to help figure that out.
I'll throw a question out there. I mean, the famous quote, philosophers have, interpreted the world, and the point is really to change it, right? And you're taking some responsibility as an educational institute for this sort of production of future expertise that is going to be able to design and steer AI technologies towards equitable, just outcomes. And yet the starting point, or one of them that you started with, is the wealth generated from oil and the need to invest that in further wealth production. So I was hoping you could talk more about, examples of actually using AI in struggles against dehumanization, against anti-colonial work, against sexism, against anti-racism, against racism and stuff like that, because it feels like all of the examples that we've looked at are examples of using AI for continued military violence, with some sprinkling of social justice concerns. So just to push back a little bit on your point that it's not that. So show me a little bit more why it's not that.
Why the technology is not, or how I think you're asking for some examples of how technology can be leveraged specifically to advance social good, right? Or are you saying?
Yeah, I think that would be cool. I think that would be that's a good interpretation.
So one of the things that can be seen from the work that's happening in the technology space that is advancing social good, as I said, is in healthcare. That's one example where we're getting the ability to actually respond to ways of supporting human health that leverages the machine technologies. I think that with the inequality, one of the opportunities that we have is actually creating structures for shared prosperity with the new oil. What's the new oil? The new oil is data. So right now, the EU, for example, is preparing to create something they're calling data trusts. And data trusts are basically instruments. Like a trust is an instrument, it's a legally fictive entity. It's a person, artificial person, who has ownership, possession of something on behalf of someone else. And what they want to do, given the incredible monetization capacity of data, is not to prevent the monetization of data, but to create the structure for shared prosperity so that ordinary people can actually benefit from and participate in the income, in the wealth that their data is being used to create. That's not up and running. That's early stage. But the point is that because the digital technology is proving so lucrative, we can either say, well, let's try to figure out how to stop companies from making money from digital technology, which I just think doesn't work. I think companies should be able to make money. I think people should be able to make money. But rather, how do we get shared prosperity? If we're going to add $100 trillion to the global economy, what problems could you solve with the $100 trillion new dollars added to the global economy? And I think that list of what you could solve is long, but I think you have to make it shared. So the data trust is one example of a technological solution to addressing inequality and trying to create trying to shrink the wealth gap and to spread that around. Other examples that are used is that I would point to is a need for social justice entities to get involved in the creation and the curation of data sets that are going to be used to train the algorithms, the AI that is going to power through different solutions in the future. How those algorithms are changed are really based on history. So maybe you have to create your own data. I don't know. But what we do need is a humanistic, justice-centered approach to the training sets, because those sets are going to determine the outputs of the AI. And so that's another example. That's happening right now only on a very limited scale, but is something that I think our universities are in a great position to be able to train the talent for, and even to begin to curate. So those are a couple of examples of how we could leverage the digital technology to advance more equitable outcomes.
So if we got maybe one last question for Sylvester before we go to the more private conversation. Okay, then I'll ask it. So how does this work play across an institution that in essence has historically defined itself around the tech part of the world, that is known vastly more for its engineering than for its humanities? And what is it? I imagine there are some challenges there. What is it like trying to move these things that require deep collaboration forward?
Yeah, this is a great question. So I'll say very concisely, Virginia Tech, as our name implies, and you just said, is certainly best known for our research and our teaching in technology. Oddly enough, strangely, Virginia Tech used to be Virginia Polytechnic Institute. It was called VPI until 1969. And it actually made a deliberate decision to become a comprehensive university. And so the official name of our university is Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University, which most people have never heard of. It's Virginia Tech. And it does cause us some branding issues when people are filling out a rankings form and they see VPISU on there and there's no Virginia Tech. But Virginia Tech is also an official brand, but our formal long name is that. Because they made a deliberate decision to do this, there's actually an astounding level of transdisciplinarity and comprehensiveness at Virginia Tech, because most institutions don't make a formal deliberate decision to become comprehensive. They just sort of find their way there. And because it was intentional, there are actually multiple structures and systems of comprehensiveness and transdisciplinarity. I'll give you a couple of quick examples. In the 1970s, Virginia Tech created a Center for Science and Science and Society that became department that was an STS department, but it actually started in humanities with these big questions around technology, and that was several decades ago. Was there in the 1980s? We created one of the first research focuses on human-computer interaction, and that became a formal center for human-computer interaction. It was in the 1980s that the research area became formed. In the 1990s, the center got formed. That continues today. We have an institute for creativity, arts, and technology that brings people together across those areas. Many of those artists are technologists. Many of those technologists are artists, and they work with people across the university. So those are actually three examples, just to say that it's not obvious from the outside, but on the inside, there's actually already a lot of history of collaboration and comprehensiveness that I think we need to build on, and that I'm hoping that our the Tech for Humanity initiative will help us with the legibility of that comprehensiveness. That doesn't mean there aren't challenges. It does mean that there's actually a lot of really positive history that has already created momentum. So people are already accustomed to seeing across disciplines, even though at a practical level, most of our tenure system, for example, is based on disciplinarity. Most of our job seeking is based on, when we advertise job, most of it is based on disciplinarity. Those are some structural issues that provide important challenges to transdisciplinarity. But ironically and not so obviously, that history of comprehensiveness is actually a really important and effective resource for us in trying to do this work.
Great, thank you. Okay.